Okay, so now let's talk about T-Distributed Stochastic Neighbor Embedding, t-SNE for short, as an alternative to PCA, okay? So basically t-SNE, which I'll be calling it for short because saying T-Distributed Stochastic Neighbor Embedding is quite a mouthful. Basically, as I said, it's another dimensionality reduction algorithm, and it's quite popular as well. It's been published quite a while back, almost 12 years ago in 2008. And in practice, in my opinion, it has proven to be more effective than PCA, but it does have some shortcomings which we'll discuss later on in this section. So why is t-SNE better than PCA? Firstly, PCA is almost a de facto standard in dimensionality reduction task, and as part of that is possibly because it's in every machine learning class. It's quite popular. It's fairly easy to understand with eigenvalues and eigenvectors. So, and it works quite well. It's very good at creating a low dimensional embedding that preserves the overall variance in the data, as you saw before when we tried actually PCA in Python. However, PCA is a linear projection, which means it's unable to capture non-linear dependencies. For example, PCA would be able to unroll the data structure on the right, okay? t-SNE, however, is not limited to linear projections, which makes it applicable to many more datasets. So how exactly does it work? t-SNE uses local structure. What that means though is that it attempts to map points of higher dimension onto lower dimensional space so that the distances between points remain almost the same. So how is it doing that? We'll go into that shortly. Let's move on. There are in fact other dimensionality reduction algorithms that attempt to do something like that. These are called local linear embeddings and kernel PCA. However, t-SNE is actually much better in practice. That's why these two, even though they're well known, they're not really popularly used. It's more like an academic research type experiments they're used to compare things. The reason t-SNE works so well though is that it solves the crowding problem caused by the curse of dimensionality. When mapping these higher dimensional points onto a lower dimension, we end up with all the points squashed, causing crowding, and that's the crowding problem that's caused by high dimensionality. So t-SNE solves this by making the optimization spread out, which you will see in our Python code shortly. So how does it work? So additionally, t-SNE uses stochastic neighbors. This allows us to have no clear line between which points are neighbors of the other points. The lack of defined boundaries is a huge advantage as it allows t-SNE to naturally take both the global and local structure into account. The local structure is more important than global structure. However, the points that are far away aren't ignored completely. This allows for a well-balanced dimensionality reduction. Okay? So let's look at the steps. So step one, basically, firstly we measure similarities between points in higher dimensional space. Imagine we have a bunch of 2D points scattered, see it right? And for each point we center a Gaussian distribution over the point like this. We then measure the density of all points under that Gaussian distribution. And this is effectively converting the high dimensional Euclidean distances between data points into conditional probabilities that represent similarities, okay? So step two now, we perform step one, however this time we use a student T distribution with 1 degree of freedom, also called the Cauchy distribution. I hope I'm saying that right. The T distribution shape allows for better modeling for distances that are far apart, okay? So this is normal distribution here, and what a Cauchy looks like, or a student's T distribution. It's a narrower and peakier type distribution. So moving on to step 3, in the last step, we want to see the set of probabilities from a low dimensional space to reflect those of high dimensional as best as possible, as we want the two mapped structures to be similar. When we then measure the differences between the probability distributions of the two dimensional spaces using the Kullback-Leibler divergence, the KL divergence, which is often written as dP of Q, okay? So the KL divergence is an asymmetrical and asymmetrical approach that compares two distributions. So basically you just use it to compare two distributions, distance between two distributions. Okay, so if you have like two normal distributions or two any shape distributions, you can use KL divergence to compare them. Okay, we then minimize our KL cost function using gradient descent, and this is what we end up. So you can actually see we're actually going to do this in Python shortly. This is the visualization of PCA, and now with t-SNE you can see they're a lot more spread out, so there's a lot more distinction between them. So we took an 8x8 pixel grid here and basically did this here with it. So that's why t-SNE is so good. Okay, so let's actually apply our t-SNE algorithm and compare it with PCA doing some visualizations with a digits dataset. So let's take a look at this. So let's open the file here. And there we go. So let's import our libraries first. Some libraries we're going to look at here, you should know: manifold, datasets, decomposition, ensemble, discriminant analysis, and random projection, which we'll all be using in the code. Firstly, let's load our digits dataset here by just importing datasets and .digits. So we get the 10 classes here. We get our x and y from our data and target part of the dataset. And then we get the number of samples, number of features, and we define the number of neighbors as 30 initially. So now this here, I'm not going to go through all of this code here. You can find the actual source of the code here. I manipulated it a bit, however I didn't change the stuff inside of here. This is basically a plotting code here, function to scale and visualize the embedding vectors. So let's run this function, and then now let's see what we do here. This here is basically to plot the digits here. So we're just going to plot a sample of the 64 dimension digits dataset, which you can see here. Then we compute PCA here. So we just basically decomposition truncated SVD. This is basically a different form of PCA. You can read about it here. All right. Then we go here, and then now we do the t-SNE. So we use manifold.t-SNE. And you can read about it here as well. T-distributed stochastic neighbor embedding. Okay, and we just define number of components being 2 for both. Initially we're going to initialize it with PCA. Okay, so alright, so let's run this. Should take about a couple seconds, maybe more. Do what you want. Okay, there we go. So it's completed after almost 2 minutes of running. So let's see. So now, as I showed you before, we have a sample block of the digits dataset, and basically this is what PCA at visualization looks like. As you can see, the definition between clusters is not very clean. The numbers represent the cluster points, which is quite cool in the visualization code. But as again, you can see it's quite messy and quite hard to determine. Now look at this. We still use the same numbers here, by the way. All right, but look how much more separation there is and distinction between clusters. You can actually visualize it very, very well. And this took a lot longer to run compared to PCA, and that's probably why it took so long for the entire block of code to run. But as you can see, t-SNE's embedding of digits is much, much better. So this is why you can actually use t-SNE sometimes to, oftentimes to basically perform your dimensionality reduction. Basically what we did here, we reduced 64-bit, because it was an 8x8 image block here, to 2D representation, and you can see how well it captured the data here. Okay, so that's it for t-SNE and its comparison with PCA. Okay,
subscribe now and press the bell icon. Never miss an update.